Good morning, church. It is a gift to be back with you all almost a year later after the celebration of ministry that you held as you entered in collaborative ministry with Reverend Kayla. As it was shared, I have been with you all this weekend for your Startup Weekend, which is a traditional offering that we host here in the southern region of the Greater Association, where we help congregations come into deeper alignment with their minister and to discern your greatest why. Why do you gather as a people of faith? Why do you gather as Unitarian Universalists in a time such as these? Why do you gather in this place? And what can you do with and for one another? I must say, I had a fantastic time Friday night. Yes. Potluck culture in churches is one of my favorite things. And I am so deeply happy that you are holding on to that as a Southern congregation, so thank you. And then yesterday, I and your staff and your board leadership met bright and early at 9 o'clock and spent a whole day together talking about the importance of your history, roles and responsibilities in the ministry that you share with and for one another. It was a long day, but it was a good day. A good day. So I want to say, and I'm not just saying this because they're in the room, if you are staff or a member of the board who was here yesterday, do you mind raising a hand for special acknowledgement? Your staff team and board are amazing. Absolutely amazing. Again, I don't say that just because they're here, but they were anticipating questions and directions and little curveballs I was gonna throw at them, and they did it with such grace and with such excitement. So I hope that you are excited for the ministry that you will get in together over the next years ahead of you. So again, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be here with you in the pulpit, and know that I bring you greetings on behalf of all of your sibling congregations across the American South, Northern Mexico, and the Caribbean. Our faith stretches far and wide, beloveds. As we continue onward, and the ever unfolding and frankly exhausting journey that is life right now, coupled with the personal and societal happenings of all sorts, what are we to do? What are we to do? I knew it was coming. What are we to do with ourselves, with our communities, with the very stories that we were raised to know as true, but have grown to realize don't fully encompass the truth, big T? What are we to do in these moments of tenderness and calamity, of frustration and joy, and the presence of both stillness and the hustle and bustle of our lives, when so many things have either changed or need to change? What are we to do? As we live into these all too real questions, I offer up this morning's homily entitled Ministry at the Beginning of the World. If you are like me, maybe you remember the beginning of lockdown and all of the feelings that it brought with it. The anxiety, the loneliness, the anger, the sorrow, the boredom, maybe. It must have been that first full week during lockdown, as I recall, struggling with my day-to-day routine. And on one such moment, I was looking out of my apartment window in Alexandria, Virginia, over Cameron Run, which is this small, murky tributary that feeds into the Potomac River. As I clutched my coffee cup to my chest, I blurted out, "I wasn't prepared for this." That part, amen. My then roommate, sitting just across the living room, looked up from her phone and said, "Ready for what, Tyler?" I said I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready for this. I was ready for the apocalypse, the doom and gloom, the fire and brimstone, the gnashing of teeth, maybe a zombie or two. I wasn't ready for a beautiful spring day. There I was, struggling to make sense of the world as that I had come to know as it began to fracture under the pressures of the pandemic and all that it brought with it. In those early weeks and months, I struggled. We struggled. As our loved ones became sick, as we cared for them and became sick ourselves, we wrestled with the weight of the world as it played out on news and social media. And we gave it the best we could as we attempted to make some semblance of normalcy. And as time went on, we began to hear, and maybe even utter, how we just wanted things to go back to normal. Back to the way things were before the virus, before social distancing, before masking, before wiping down groceries, before worrying about air quality and purity, before inflation, before fighting over toilet paper and paper towels. The before times. But as is our habit, as creatures of habit, when reflecting on the past, we so often do so in dichotomies. That is to say, when we think back on past events, we tend to place them in solid camps of either totally good or totally bad, given our experiences of them. As I think back on those days, months, and years before the arrival of the pandemic, I'm left wondering, what was so wholly good about them in which we would even want to go back to them in the first place? Now I know that, and I want to honor that when we say we want to go to the before times, back to the way things were, what we're doing is kind of signaling how our hearts are broken and weary and how we are exhausted. But how many times in those before times, and even since then, have we thought to ourselves, this is it. This is the end. Surely it's all done and over with now. And casually naming a few, I can recall the chaos of Y2K. And that is, for those of you who might not have been around at that moment, that is when the calendar and the clock struck midnight on the year 2000, and we were all quite worried. We stockpiled our money and Pepsi, and some of us were still dancing like it was 1999. And of course, there was the Bush administration, or the Obama administration, or the first Trump administration. And then there was the pandemic itself. The wars and the genocides, the rise and fall of the economy, the housing crisis, the endless accounts of mass gun violence and natural disasters, and the list of atrocities and heartbreaks go on and on and on. But as a religious people, as a people who routinely gather to wrestle with truth, both new and old, we are taught time and time again in so many ways that the ending of one thing is indeed the beginning of something else. In the sacred story from Genesis, the first of two creation accounts, in the biblical text, we hear of a detailed motions in which God herself proceeds to bring creation into being by breathing life over the murky waters and separating them from what would become the earth. It is the creative imagination and poetic genius of the ancient Israelites as they sought to craft meaning out of the heat and force the swirling gases and minerals that would become our galaxy. It places humanity not at the center, but as equal participants along the heavens and the earth, the shadowy waters and the moving airways. And of course, we can't forget the multitude of animals, because the puppy dogs and the kittens also count in creation too. And with no preface, with no explanation given, the plot line of existence just begins in full order. After all, this is what many of us were taught as the truth, big T. After all, God creates, full stop. And if we're being frank, God creates from nothing. But when we turn our hearts and attentions to the words more closely, what we notice is that God themselves did not create the cosmos and everything that exists within it from nothing, but probably, crafted existence with what was already on hand, with that which already existed. The seemingly separate parts, maybe even the broken parts of the previous creation. There's no question. There's no question that each of us have faced our own endings before. And maybe even some of those endings felt apocalyptic. But unlike what I was prepared for during the earliest moments of lockdown and have since been reminded, endings can rarely be prepared for, and when they do arrive, more often than not, they appear in ways we never expected. And sometimes these endings and these revelations don't come from outside factors or forces, but are sometimes self-induced. In Cheers to the End of the World, Elba Morales writes, sometimes we orchestrate the end of our own worlds. The decision to leave the toxic job, saying yes to trusting new love and admitting that we need help, and maybe even just admitting, I need to sit down for a hot moment. There's blessedness in new beginnings. No matter how difficult they may be or how they come about. And as change is the one and only real constant, we must meet these moments with as much heart as we can muster from within ourselves and from those around us. For we can play an intentional role in our own new beginnings. As Dr. Elias Ortega, president of Meadville Lombard Theological School, says, facing apocalypse with courage and faith is understanding that it reveals other possible ways of being, of acting, of living in the world while we still have time. In full truth, who we once were is no more. It's gone. The world as it used to be has perished, and change is constant in the great river of being. The good news in all of this, because believe it or not, there is actually always some good news to be found. The good news is that we are wading through the waters, crafting new pathways, and laying new foundations with old pieces every single day. But we must do so with great intention and imagination and precision, not just as a tactic of survival. This intentional act of imagination requires that we honor all that has come to pass, to take stock of how previous iterations may have shaped us, and then to manifest a new way that honors all of us going forward. Here then, as Adrienne Marie Brown often says, we must create lives worthy of living. We must create lives worthy of living. Likewise, we must also create communities worthy of being a part of. For it is in these communities, much like the church Big C is tasked with doing, that we become the co-creation lab of existence. creating ways of deep connection and well-being, bound together in care that can hold us through all of the endings and new beginnings, pandemics and apocalypses, twists and turns that are still to come. Y'all, we live in unprecedented times, and frankly, I'm tired of living in them. But here we are. As we move through this next chapter, into this new world becoming, we must do so guided by a faith anchored in clear and bold values. In my own faithful journey as a practicing Unitarian Universalist, in my work with congregations and communities like yours across the region, I detect we must go forward with 3 guides for our journey, lest we be tempted to the ways of the before times or cast asunder every time another horrendous thing or policy occurs. Our first guide, slowing down. As we venture into this new world, let us go slow and move with exacting precision. We have been trained to do and work at a fever's pace, and while capitalism is still crumbling, it is not dead yet in this new world, but the spirit of life is much stronger. It is beckoning us, begging us really to move different as we begin to realize that the God of death, known in the form of free market greed, has an offertory which is far too heavy to bear. Your production is not going to save any of us. By slowing down, we can begin to build up a life-giving pathways that meet the needs of today in more sustainable ways. No more quick fixes for the sake of convenience. Our second guide, relationships. We have come accustomed to and have even begun to expect in some way, shapes, or form, if we're being honest, that relationships of connection are connections of expediency. Fast and easy, coming with some type of easily presented value that can be cashed in on at any moment. In this new world, especially as a religious community that proclaims the power and truth that is our interdependence, we must let our relationships be both our teacher and our sucker. Relationships of deep meaning challenge us to grow and will serve as our North Star as we strive towards liberation. And our last guide, depth over breadth. In the before times, we were instructed that we must build wide, go wide, be wide, all of which whispered secretly, ignore the depths of things. But if the pandemic and the last several years has shown us anything, such an approach to life, to our relationships, to our communities, to our churches, to our own spiritual journeys, isn't sustainable, let alone useful when the going gets tough. When we engage the depths of our souls or the outer reaches of our minds, then we are able to know more fully of nuances and complexities of awe and inspiration, of grace and of mercy. As elders and teachers of our tradition have reminded us throughout the ages, we are indeed all ministers in this tradition. Morning, colleagues. We are called to collectively carry the load of life together. For doing so makes its burden much, much lighter. In this new world becoming, following all that has perished, following all that has and is still being lost, we must faithfully meet this apocalyptic moment with as much courage and heart as we can. We must meet this moment with what Walter Brueggemann calls a prophetic imagination. That is, we must call to mind, body, and soul a vision of a new world where mutuality, care, and generosity are central to our very being. and give shape to that holy thing we call love. For we can shape the next creation. After all, we are God's partners. And as the prophet and sage Grace Lee Boggs once said, we must transform ourselves to transform the world. For truly, there is no time better than this to drink deeply the mystery of transformation. And in so doing, may we prophetically minister to the new world becoming. May it be so. Amen.